What if a young, soft-spoken soldier could bring an entire nation back to its feet? Without money, without a powerful army, and without fear. This is the inspiring story of Ibrahim Traore, the man who went from an unknown officer in the military to becoming the youngest head of state in the world and a symbol of hope for millions. In a time of chaos, when Burkina Faso was struggling with terrorism, political instability, and deep poverty, one man rose from the shadows, not for fame or fortune, but for justice. His journey isn't just about politics. It's about courage, sacrifice, and a vision to rewrite history. Before the uniform, before the revolution, and before the world even knew his name, Ibrahim Traore was just a quiet, determined boy with big dreams in a struggling nation. Born in 1988 in the small town of Bondakwi, in western Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore grew up in a modest family. His upbringing was humble, surrounded by dusty roads, tight-knit communities, and the echoes of a country that had seen repeated political instability since its independence from France in 1960. Burkina Faso was not an easy place to grow up. There was poverty, lack of opportunity, and limited access to education in rural areas. But young Traore was different. He was curious, intelligent, and deeply aware of the challenges around him. He earned a place at the University of Ouagadougou, one of the country's top institutions. There, he studied geology, a field rooted in science and the study of natural resources, perhaps foreshadowing his future interest in protecting Burkina Faso's land and people. But even during his university years, something inside him was pulling toward a higher calling. While most students were focused on careers, Traore had his eyes on justice. He was drawn to military service, not for glory, but because he believed that a soldier could be a force for change and protection, especially in a country where civilians were often left defenseless. In 2010, he officially joined Burkinabe Army, a path that would not only test his courage but shape his destiny. Unlike many who rise through connections or politics, Traore's rise was based on merit. He trained hard. He pushed himself. He joined elite units tasked with fighting terrorism in some of the most dangerous parts of the Sahel region, especially the northern zones, where extremist violence had been rising since 2015. These were not just training exercises. These were real battles where lives were lost, villages were attacked, and fear was everywhere. But Traore stood firm. He quickly gained a reputation as a fearless frontline commander, someone who didn't bark orders from behind, but led missions on the ground, standing shoulder to shoulder with his men, enduring the same dangers, eating the same rations, and sleeping under the same skies. What made him special wasn't just his bravery. It was his calm presence and moral compass. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but he was the most respected. Fellow soldiers often said, "When Traore speaks, people listen, because he speaks with purpose." It was during these operations that he saw firsthand the failures of the government and military leadership. Soldiers lacked equipment. Intelligence was ignored. Corruption ran deep. Meanwhile, villagers were left defenseless, living in fear of night raids and ambushes. This wasn't the country he had signed up to protect. These moments deeply affected him and planted the seeds for what would later become a historic uprising. By the time 2022 arrived, Burkina Faso was no longer just a struggling nation. It was a country in crisis. The streets of Ouagadougou, once filled with life, were heavy with tension. Villages across the north and east had turned into ghost towns. More than 2 million people were displaced by violence. Families lived in fear of terrorist groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who attacked schools, markets, and even hospitals. The government? Silent and paralyzed. Every day, news broke of massacres, kidnappings, and soldiers dying on the front lines with no backup, no support, and no plan. The people were tired of empty speeches, tired of international aid that came with strings, tired of leaders who sat in air-conditioned offices while rural communities burned. In January 2022, hope briefly returned when Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandoval Damiba staged a coup, promising security and change. But months later, it was clear nothing changed. In fact, things got worse. Damiba spent more time defending his position than defending his people. His administration became just another version of the same broken system. He blocked criticism, ignored frontline commanders, and focused more on diplomacy than direct action. Among the military, frustration boiled over, and one voice began to rise louder than the rest. Captain Ibrahim Traore. He had watched his fellow soldiers die due to lack of support. He had seen entire towns fall to terrorists because leaders in the capital refused to act. He had visited displaced families who had lost everything and received only empty promises in return. Traore wasn't planning a coup for power. He didn't want to be president, but he and a group of young, idealistic officers decided that if no one else would protect the country, they would. On the night of September 29, 2022, heavy gunfire echoed through Ouagadougou. Armored vehicles blocked roads. The presidential palace was surrounded. The people feared another violent coup, but this time, something felt different. By the next morning, it was official. Captain Ibrahim Traore had taken control of Burkina Faso. Damiba was out. The flag was still flying, but the leadership had changed hands. But what shocked the world was what Traore said in his first national address. Our only objective is the security and integrity of our nation. We are not here for privilege. We are here for duty. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't speak behind a polished podium. He stood in his military fatigues, eyes firm, voice steady. There was no celebration, just a message of urgency, resolve, and raw truth. He explained why the government had failed, how soldiers were dying without purpose, and why Burkina Faso needed to take its future into its own hands without foreign interference. To many inside the country, it was a moment of awakening. Traore wasn't a politician. He was a warrior with a conscience. He didn't come with promises. He came with a plan. But not everyone welcomed him. Foreign powers, especially France, which had long held military and economic influence over Burkina Faso, were alarmed. International media branded him a radical. Sanctions were discussed. Diplomats were uneasy. But inside Burkina Faso, the mood was different. People took to the streets, not in protest, but in celebration. They waved flags. They cheered soldiers. Young people painted Traore's face on murals across the capital. To them, he was not a coup leader. He was a savior. In just a matter of days, Traore had gone from unknown captain to the voice of revolution. But he knew the hardest part was still ahead. He had taken power, but now he had to rebuild a broken country. When Captain Ibrahim Traore stepped into power in late 2022, he didn't walk into a palace. He walked into a battlefield, not just against armed militants, but against corruption, fear, foreign pressure, and hopelessness that had gripped the heart of Burkina Faso for years. At just 34 years old, Traore became the youngest head of state in the world. But you wouldn't know it from his behavior. There were no red carpets, no gold-trimmed offices, no elite bodyguards parading around. Traore didn't even bother to change out of his military uniform. He was often seen wearing his combat fatigues, standing among farmers, speaking with villagers, or sharing meals with soldiers on front lines. He sent a clear message. Leadership is not about status. It's about service. From the moment he took office, Traore made it clear that Burkina Faso would no longer be a puppet, not of France, not of foreign corporations, not of anyone. His government began reviewing and rejecting foreign military agreements that he believed were undermining the country's sovereignty. French troops were asked to leave. Their military base was shut down. He turned instead to regional cooperation, local defense, and self-reliance. But this wasn't just about cutting ties. It was about rebuilding dignity. Traore launched bold initiatives that many thought were impossible for a war-torn, aid-dependent country. He encouraged rural farming and community agriculture to make Burkina Faso self-sufficient in food production. He invited young people, thousands of them, to volunteer and defend their villages, giving them training, uniforms, and a sense of purpose. He increased the transparency of government spending, cracking down on corruption, and making sure money went to security, healthcare, and education. He visited front lines personally, not as a commander, but as a brother in arms. Soldiers who had never seen a general visit now had the head of state sleeping beside them in the trenches. This wasn't politics. This was real leadership. And the people responded with passion and loyalty. In marketplaces, his name echoed in chants. Children learned his quotes in school. Artists painted him not as a king, but as Le Capitaine du Peuple, the people's captain. But Traore didn't allow himself to be glorified. He repeatedly said he doesn't want to cling to power. In his speeches, he stated clearly that his role is temporary. His mission is not to rule, but to restore. "I am not here to stay in office forever. I am here to ensure the country survives," he told his people. That kind of humility is rare in global politics and almost unheard of in military leadership. Of course, the road has not been easy. His strong anti-colonial stance and nationalistic policies have made him a target of criticism from international organizations. Some Western media label him a populist or a military strongman, but within Burkina Faso, he is still seen as a leader with courage, a man who chose risk over comfort, and someone who represents the dreams of the youth. And the youth are rising. Traore has awakened something powerful in the hearts of Burkina Faso's younger generation. The belief that change doesn't come from outside, it comes from within. Under his leadership, young Burkinabes are not just hoping for a better future, they're building it themselves. Today, Captain Ibrahim Traore stands not only as a leader of Burkina Faso, but as a symbol of African resilience, youth empowerment, and fearless leadership in the face of overwhelming odds. But let's be clear, this is not a fairy tale. Burkina Faso still faces immense challenges. Terrorist groups remain active in remote regions. The economy is fragile. Access to health care, clean water, and education is still limited for many. The country is walking a razor's edge between chaos and rebirth. Yet something has fundamentally changed. There is now belief. There is now momentum. There is now a vision. Under Traore, the country has seen a shift from dependence to defiance, not in a reckless way, but in a way that says, we will not be controlled. We will chart our own path. He has ignited a sense of national pride rarely seen in the region. You see it in the eyes of the youth. You hear it in the songs playing on the streets. You feel it in the energy of volunteer fighters defending their villages not for money, but for love of country. Across Africa, young people are watching. From Mali to Niger, from Senegal to Chad, they see in Traore a reflection of their frustrations and their hopes. Many are beginning to question the old systems, the foreign military bases, the corrupt elites, and the endless promises from abroad that never deliver. Traore's story has inspired conversations across the continent about what African leadership could be: brave, homegrown, and people first. But his journey is far from over. He has promised a transition to civilian rule after security is restored. But until then, he continues to push against the tide, balancing diplomacy, defense, and development in a country fighting for its life. Whether you support all of his decisions or not, one thing is undeniable. Ibrahim Traore has changed the narrative. He has proven that leadership isn't about how long you've been in office or how powerful your allies are. It's about your willingness to fight for your people, even when it costs you everything. And for the young girl in the village who now walks to school without fear, for the farmer who no longer runs at the sound of motorcycles in the distance, for the soldier who feels seen, heard, and supported on the front lines. That change is already a legacy in the making. Ibrahim Traore may not be a global celebrity. He may not make headlines in Western media every day, but in the heart of West Africa, he has become a spark, a light in the dark. And if history remembers him as a leader who lit the fire of independence, justice, and self-respect for a new generation of Africans, then his mission will be complete.